We've got a brand new guest here, Dave Waddy from Zimbo's, who represents some of the most exciting brands that we have access to in South Africa, being Loba, Magla, and Wakol. You know, Dave has a hell of a reputation when it comes to solid and engineered timbers, and he has got all these supporting brands that can take these floors to the next level and really endure in our homes and our projects. And if we assemble them in the right way, we can achieve a floor, a solid wood floor or engineered wood floor result that is long-term. It's not just a quick flash in the pan kind of floor that you can have that looks great for 6 months and then it starts looking tired. These are the products that take it to the new level. And thank you so much for joining us here today. You've got some exciting things to show us.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah, thanks very much for introducing me, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your busy days to come through and see the presentation. So what I'm really going to try to do is I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of engineered versus solid, and then we're going to go through some of the information you might not know about coatings. We're also going to touch on care maintenance, and I'll also take a little bit of time on the outdoor side. So, before you actually specify a floor, one really should be understanding a little bit about what you are specifying. So, in terms of flooring these days, back in the day, it obviously was all solid. Solid wooden floor was the way to go, and a solid wood floor was either nailed down or it was generally glued down. Then the engineered flooring came in, and the reason was twofold. One is that it obviously is a lot more stable because it's got a plywood base, so that enables you to go wider and longer without having to worry too much. Also, in terms of your installation, the engineered floor can be floated or it can be glued down. So briefly touching on that, if you float a floor, you're going to have that knocking and that resonance that you get similar to a laminate. Obviously, while we're on it, please, laminate is plastic. Engineered is a veneer of wood on top of a ply base. So often we get people phoning in, they say, can you look after our laminate floor? And I say, well, no, because it's a plastic floor with a photograph of wood essentially on it. That's what a laminate is. So laminate has got no wood in it at all. Let's be clear on that. We often get people being confused. Clients, obviously, more than anyone else, because it's difficult for them. You know, they see all of this. They've also got LVT in the mix, and it all looks like wood. So clearly, laminate is plastic. So what we're talking about is an engineered floor generally. So you've got a veneer on top, and then you've got a plywood base. There are two kinds of plywood bases generally. A 3-ply, which is pine and poplar, that's less stable. So if you have a 3-ply floor and you are going to glue it down, or if you're going to float the floor, make sure you are speccing a proper moisture barrier. If you put a 3-ply floor down and you glue it down without a moisture barrier, you are highly likely to have some form of movement on that floor. Now, in the old days, we all remember the solid wood floors and all the lovely popping, because every one of us, I'm sure every architect gets a call and you've had a flood or something's gone wrong, and a solid wood floor peaks and up it comes. Now, an engineered floor is interesting because it doesn't generally peak across the width. Normally, an engineered floor, the first signs of moisture ingress or moisture issues are actually on the end grain. So if you had two planks like that, where it meets, it lips along the end grain. So that, just as a matter of interest, if you go to an engineered floor and you can see that sort of thing going on, it's normally a moisture problem. But with a 3-ply floor, you are obliged to put in a moisture barrier. We would recommend a moisture barrier anyway, but in terms of a multi-ply base, I just would see if I've got a multi-ply base here for you, which I don't seem to have. But basically, your multi-ply base is obviously plywood, which is almost like a waterproof ply, and it's got the veneer sitting on top. So that is more stable than the 3-ply, which is your pine and poplar. So there you can see that's 3-ply. You've got pine and poplar, and you've got the oak on the top. By contrast, a multi-ply floor is going to have waterproof ply with the same veneer on top. So generally in the market, you get both. The multiply floor, if you're on a first floor situation and it is bone dry, you really wouldn't need a moisture barrier. That product is generally super stable, and you'll get away with it. It won't be an issue. So then in terms of your engineered floor, you've specified it, you've looked at the widths, lengths and all that sort of thing. And of course, the other big thing is grading. Guys always wonder, why is the price so different? Why is the price of one competitor versus the other completely different? Well, generally that is grading. I import a lot, and when we import, the difference in price between a CDE grade, which is very rustic, and an AB grade is probably 100%, to give you an idea. So a 240 AB floor could be 1,400 a square. The CDE equivalent, in other words, very rustical, could be at 700, literally half the price. So guys, you got to know, if you're wanting to specify something, you got to know apples against apples, because it's, from our point of view, it's often quite annoying that the marketplace doesn't understand that. Yeah, but why are you so expensive compared to the guy next door? Well, the guy next door has got massive color variation and a lot of sapwood. So sapwood is the white that you see in a plank. So where you get these flashes of white in an oak floor particularly, those flashes of white are sapwood. If you take that to Europe, you are not allowed sapwood at all in Europe. So you go to Germany, if you produce a plank with sapwood, they'll just kick you out. Done. So that is why also, if we import from Europe instead of importing from China, anything out of Europe generally has got no sapwood and much less color variation. So look, a rustic floor doesn't mean that it's an ugly floor, but as long as the client understands it, and this is one of the biggest issues, the client has to understand the grading they're getting. So when I give them a little plank like that, which represents absolutely 0% of the floor, they can look at that and there's not one knot. We produce the floor, lay it down, and there are knots everywhere, and they have an absolute fit. So what we endeavor to do as a flooring supplier is to make sure that even if they lock into a small plank and a color, you show them enough of the floor for it to be representative for them. And that avoids a lot of hassles later on down the line. So then the follow-on to this is, what is on top of the floor? Because at the end of the day, a floor is only as durable as what is on it. So if we've all glued the same floor down, fantastic. But now how is one going to last more than the other? Or why has one got more scratches than the other? And this is one of the major issues we have, is that people don't understand the difference between the coatings. So I want to take a little bit of time just to explain that to you. So once again, if you go reel back 10 years, there was really mostly finishing on site. And you normally did that either with some form of a varnish. Back in the day, it was the old Born Gleam, which shone and was very plasticky, solvent-based product. They used to roll it on, and off you would go. It was progressing. So now you are on to having water-based coating, so at least it didn't kill the installer who was now installing it or the client. So it started to progress, but then came the whole pre-finishing process, which makes a lot of sense, because back in the day when we used to do everything, where we used to go with our big machines, the Legler machines, we used to go to site, we'd sand the floor down, we'd come to you as the specifier, what color do you want? No, I want a black floor. And then we're now trying to stain the black floor, and the guy with the wheelbarrow goes across it, and then somebody else jumps up and down on it, and it's a mess. So obviously it made 100% sense for this thing to progress to pre-finishing. In other words, you're finishing the floor off-site. However, there are three major coatings that you can finish a floor with. Okay, so first is a naturally oiled floor. Now I'm going to mention some suppliers here so that you can understand what I'm talking about. Monocoat is a natural oil. In Loba, we also have natural oils. Waka have a natural oil. The problem is with a natural oil, and I'm actually going to pass it around for you. So the natural oil feels magnificent, silky smooth to touch, looks incredibly natural, okay? So this is very appealing for a lot of people, for clients, for architects, designers. A naturally oiled floor is very, very appealing, because It's ultra matte, looks very natural, and with a natural oil, it is principally, it's a soya base generally, and it obviously penetrates in. So nothing is left on the surface, it's all in. The downside of a naturally oiled floor, if you specify a naturally oiled floor into a kitchen area, I can tell you now it is going to mark. And it's going to mark in the beginning particularly badly. As you go along and you do your care and maintenance, it improves in durability. So this is the strange thing about it. And there's nothing's perfect. So a naturally oiled floor's got its negatives, which principally are like red hot cooking fat coming out of a stove onto a naturally oiled floor, it marks. So if you put it into a kitchen, you can be absolutely sure within a week, the client, once they've moved in, is going to be on the phone to you saying, listen, the floor's marking. By contrast, as you go down the line, once you close the surface through your care products, a naturally oiled floor does gradually become more durable. But it's better suited to bedrooms and lounge spaces and spaces where you're not spilling products. Like red wine on a naturally oiled floor, again, it allows it to go through. So I'll let you pass that around just so that you can get a handle on it. So naturally oiled floor, very well understood by Europeans. If you've got a European client, particularly German, Danish, Swedish, they understand a naturally oiled floor. But remember, they take their shoes off when they walk in the house. They don't, like us Africans, we blunder in with dust and dirt and the shoes, and that a naturally oiled floor doesn't like that. Okay, so you've got to be really careful if you're going to specify a naturally oiled floor. So then, because of the issues related to a naturally oiled floor, then the guys started getting smart about it and technology moved on. And then we started into the world of UV coatings. So most products that are pre-finished in China have a UV coating on, almost 95% of them. So a UV coating, what is a UV coating? And you get a UV oil and you get a UV varnish, and the guys get all worked up and confused about it. Essentially, it's almost the same thing. It's a surface coating, most importantly. How is it applied? Because that's really important. A UV coated floor, which I can tell you now, out of the people selling on the market in this country, probably 80% are UV coated right now. What it is they put a plank down, there's a long line, and it sprays the product on the surface, and it goes under a UV light that cures it instantly. However, you need to put not one or not two, you need to put numerous coatings onto a UV coated floor to get it durable enough. So myself and Andy, who's my partner in our business, we do a lot of flooring inspections for SAFA, which is the South African Wood and Laminate Association. And quite a few of the problems are associated with product that is staining or going right through it. And it's not the UV coating, it's the fact that the guys haven't actually coated, they haven't put enough layers of product on. So UV coated floor, it's wonderful, goes through, the UV light cures it, and now you have the floor which probably looks a little bit more plasticky or not quite as natural as a water-based varnish or a natural oil, but nevertheless, it's looking quite good. The problem is with it, you cannot repair a UV-coated floor. And that, I've got to say, remember that. A UV-coated floor, when it goes in, if it gets scratched, you're taking the plank out and you're putting another one in, because it is literally finished in that factory environment, cured with a UV light. We can't take a UV light to site. You can't now start sanding a board down and applying the coating. So while it is very convenient and it's also cost effective, the issue with it is that you can't easily repair it. And also now, let's say you guys specify the joinery. So I want the kitchen top done, and I want the staircase, and I want a skirting. How are you going to finish it with a UV coating? You're not. So now you don't get a perfect match. So this is where you walk into the floor is fine, the trim is different, and then so it's got its pluses and it's got its negatives, like all things really. So the UV coated floor also, if I import a UV coated floor, stock standard out of China, $1 a square meter. But again, generally for $1 a square meter, in 2 years, you're going to get a lot of fine scratches. It scratches more easily because really you get what you pay for. So in terms of UV coated floors, you get a Rolls Royce and you get the sort of VW Beetle sort of thing. So you've got to work out which supplier is doing what and what their guarantees are and that sort of thing as well. So those natural oil, then we've got our UV coated, and then the last product is a water-based varnish. I mean, solvent-based generally we don't even touch anymore for obvious reasons. I mean, for health issues, for your people installing and so on, that's gone. But a water-based varnish essentially comes in a one component or two components. So the advantages of a water-based coating, which is hand applied, is that generally when you apply it, you use a specific roller. So for instance, with us, we have a finishing plant and they will finish it with a roller. You will get exactly the right amount of product on there because the roller, like a German roller, will specify 120 grams to the surface, and that 2 coats and then you know you're done. But the big advantage is that you can repair on site. So if somebody scratches the floor, the client spills something really bad, thinners or something like that, you can do repairs on site. So that makes life a lot easier. And then, of course, you can go 2 component and you can go 1 component. So a 2 component product, let me have a look. I can't see where our 2 component. Okay, here. So that is a 2 component product, which is basically you've got the varnish and you've got the hardener. So in Germany, to give you an idea, the Germans will sell a 2 component product with a 15-year limited guarantee. So we put a 2 component water-based product from Loba into BP head office in the V&A waterfront. They did the correct care maintenance and the floor was stunning for years and years and years because they basically had the right product in the right place. Restaurants, again, you have to be really careful. So maybe we should ask ourselves, what is deemed to be necessary for a commercial coating? So commercial coating in a hotel environment, the foyer and your restaurant would be a 2 component product. Your bedrooms, on the other hand, you'll get away with a 1 component product. Your bedroom does not have the same level of sort of durability that is needed compared to your entrance hall and your restaurant. Those are your major areas. Staircases as well. Staircases always get hammered. So there you need to be careful in terms of what you specify. And of course, a varnish, not only are you talking about the physical aspect of are we scratching this thing, but there is what we call, you've got your mechanical resistance, but you've also got chemical resistance. So a 2 component product, when you spill wine or if you spill olive oil, all of that sort of thing is what we term chemical resistance. So a 2 component product, not only does it make it more difficult to scratch the product, it also means it's a lot more difficult to stain the product. Okay, so it's both aspects. It's the 2 component gives you more chemical resistance, more mechanical resistance as well. Okay, so that really is essentially your the differences. Natural oil, UV coatings, be it UV oil or your UV varnish, same, pretty much, and then your water-based products. And then we will come to it later, but what is critical in terms of all floors is to make sure you get a specification on your care maintenance from the supplier. And they need to really give it to you in writing, and it can't be like a half-baked, oh, well, you maybe do this and maybe do that. It should be really specific because that really is what long-term will affect the durability of the floor. If you have the right care products, I can assure you, it makes the world of difference to how that floor performs. And then a few other basic items, but I'll go through that. So after that, we then come to, typically these days, 90-something% of the world's floors are oak. So you say, why oak? Well, one, a lot of FSC and PEFC certified oak is produced in the world. That means it's a sustainably grown product. So absolutely that's what we want to hear. Whereas your things like a panga or Iroko, a lot of the tropical hardwoods, they're dodgy, you know what I mean? So it makes absolute sense that a lot of the world's floors are now oak. But there's a much bigger reason. The reason is principally that oak stains beautifully. It's like a white t-shirt that you're wearing there. That t-shirt you could stain any color you want, and you're good to go, and as long as you do it correctly. So that is the major reason, is that it's so flexible. Ultimately, the average consumer wants color. They're not too hit up in terms of what's actually on the floors. As long as it lasts and it looks decent, they want a specific color. So that's why staining has become important. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the staining. Essentially, you get two different stains. So what I've got here, that's a water-based stain. And then I've also got from Loba, we have, this is an old tin. It's solvent-based, this stain, but it's the amount of solvent in is minuscule. However, that's much more forgiving in terms of the person who's actually doing the staining than the water-based product. And the reason is that a water-based product, a water-based stain absorbs quickly. So when you're staining, it's essential that the whole surface has been sanded in a similar fashion, because what you do on the surface reflects what you see. So particularly if you're dark staining, if you have scratch marks from the sanding machine, the dark stain just highlights that. So you guys could walk in before they stain, the floor looks fantastic, but you haven't looked closely at it, and any scratch marks or anything like that will then be highlighted with a dark stain. So that's why also on a pre-finishing plant, it's easier to stain in that environment, because it's obviously like a perfect environment. You haven't got too many people, you don't have dust and all that sort of thing. But I thought what would be possibly interesting for you is when you're staining, depending on the surface, the stain can be a lot darker or it can be a lot lighter. So if you sand a floor very, very fine, you close the surface. When you close the surface, less color goes into the floor. So I'll do a demonstration here for you. But here, what I've done is I've actually water popped the one side. So what is water popping? What I've done is I've simply wiped the one side of the floor with a damp cloth with water, and the other side has just been normally sanded. But maybe just pass it around, so that you'll feel the difference in texture, but you'll see it now when I stain it. So if you're clever on site, particularly when it comes to a scenario where you're sanding and sealing on site, because let's face it, there's still a lot of timber floors down in the market. You might find an old Oregon floor, you might find old oak floors, and if you're getting a sanding and sealing team into the floor, it's quite useful to know, how do I make that floor either darker or lighter? If you can just understand some of that, it actually is helpful as well. Certainly your whites and grays are generally very easy to apply. However, once again, with oak has got a substance in it called tannin, okay? So tannin is very yellow, and part of the issue with a white stain is that often the actual yellow and the tannin in the oak comes up into that white stain. So that's something that you have to be careful of. With Loba, again, we've got a primer that we use. You first color the floor, and then we use a primer to stop that tannin coming up. But it can be a major problem. I mean, we were at a floor this week in Betty's Bay, which is now bright yellow, and the client is obviously rejecting the floor. There's a big argument going on. And essentially, the flooring installer really hasn't done too much wrong. He's just quite unlucky in that whatever that batch of oak that he imported has got a high level of tannin in it, and he doesn't have a primer. He doesn't have the technology to actually prevent it from coming up. So with the Zimbo's floor, we do not do a white stain without this primer that locks the yellow, the tannin down. And it is principally caused by water-based products. So if you use, for instance, a natural oil, the natural oil doesn't have the same effect, because it's the water going into the oak that pushes the yellow back up. So that's also a bit of a danger with a water-based stain, is that it can also accentuate this yellowness coming out. So I must say, sometimes I wonder why we are in wooden flooring, because there's 100 million things that can go wrong. But it is generally, It's a fun industry, and the more you know about it, the more you still got to learn. But there are methods that we can do to actually, halt that procedure. So what we'll do, just so that you can see, I'll just put a little bit of stain on the one side, and I'm going to put a little bit of stain on the other. Now remember, with a stain, the color needs to be in the wood. So you don't ever have the color left on top of the wood. So you apply the stain, and generally, no matter what your methodology is, you have one person applying and the other person removing. So what you want is the color needs to go into the fibers, so that when you put your coating over the top, the color's locked down into the wood. And that means, from a durability point of view, as long as the coating on the top doesn't wear out, you're safe, and the color doesn't get worn through. The way in the old days you used to get wood ock with a lot of color in the varnish. Then if the varnish was wearing, then it became patchy. Right, so let's quickly do this. So there I'm removing the surplus, and then let's do the same effect over here. So here we have identical stain, but you can see there's literally a 50% difference in color. And that literally is what we call water popping. So you can do a similar sort of thing if you just change the grit level that you finish on in terms of sanding. All you're talking about is having one surface that's more closed and another surface that's more open, so you're allowing more color to go in. So generally, if we're talking about sanding and sealing a floor on site, you have a belt sander, which is the big machine that everybody wanders behind, and then you have what we term a flipper edger, which is the thing that and so that is obviously what you do the perimeter. The problem is normally when you're staining, where the guy with the edger meets the guy with the belt sander, this is the area where you have problems. So what you really should be doing is the guy should do the edge first, then he uses the big machine and he goes as close to the wall as possible. If you do the big machine first and then the guy goes crazy with the edger, when you stain, you just see marks all over the place. Also, the guys if they go 36, 80, 120, and if they skip one of the middle processes, the 36 grit, and it particularly applies to a solid wood floor, a 36 grit is what we term a leveling cut. So that actually levels the floor, and then every subsequent grit just removes the scratch marks from the 36, because the 36, to level that floor and to get out all the variation out, the 36 grit obviously scratches the surface. So those subsequent grits literally are just to get all of those marks out. So, but the darker the stain, the more tricky it is. So, I mean, I remember we did Victoria Hotel, we did a double black solid herringbone floor on site. That's a tricky one. Anyway, the guys managed to get it right, but you got to be hell of a careful. So, So there we go. So that's a little bit, I thought, just a bit of fun in terms of teaching you guys a little bit in terms of what's involved with a stain. Obviously, when you do it in a factory environment, so what we would do is we will obviously stain, then you dry it, and then you put your coating on, which in our case, we use a lot of the water-based varnishes. But again, when the guys are rushing, you can have problems. So if with a finishing plant where the guys rush it, they stain, and then they put the product on too quickly, or they box it too quickly, this is where you can have problems. I've seen some floors recently on our inspections where they're getting like little black speckles in the floor. That's, again, normally where they just, you're going a little bit quick.
When you stain the floor, you'll throw that stuff as it is.
Okay, with us, the way the Germans do it is they give us a stainless steel trowel. So the great thing about a trowel is a stainless steel trowel, and it has a stabilizer bar. So what that means is when you're staining, the guys will stain like that, and that applies it very evenly. Or you can use rags where they're ragging it on, but that's more wasteful. Funnily enough, a stainless steel trowel, you lose very little of the product, unless it's an old Oregon floor with big gaps, and then the stain goes down. But what we do to neutralize that stain is we would normally use a single disc machine with a brown buffing pad, So the one guy's applying, and then the other guy moves with a single disc machine, and he goes into the fresh wood to clean the pad, back to the stain, and so on. And then obviously, once you finish staining, you got to leave it. But you never ever sand a primer, and you never ever sand a stain. So also, just touching on a primer, why do we use primers? Well, the old days, or the solid wood floor, the reason for a primer was to prevent what we call side bonding. So what side bonding is when your floorboards stick together, because normally the varnish has got adhesive properties to it. So what a primer does, not only does it fill the grain before you put your varnish on, it also stops the floorboard sticking together. With engineered floor, you don't have that issue anymore, because what used to happen with a solid wood floor, if you think about the old nail-down France Panzer floor, you would find he would nail the whole floor down, and then he would want that floor to have movement to it. Now, if you applied a sealant, a varnish to it without a primer, you'd have 10 rows gluing themselves together, and when they shrank in our summer, by February, March, you'd get what we call a line break. And what that is it's basically 10 boards are stuck together, and all of the shrinkage is taken up in one gap. So you get like an 8 mil, 6 mil, 8 mil gap opening up. But an engineered floor is so stable. It's one of the advantages of why we use an engineered floor. With the primer as well, the thing that determines the color of a floor is a primer as well. That's really important. So if you use a solvent-based primer on, for instance, Zimbabwean teak, it makes that red, rich, dark brown or Iroko. It'll give you a very rich color. If you use a water-based primer, it'll keep it a lot lighter. So your primer, and I'm not talking staining, your primer can also vary the appearance of the floor quite substantially. So you would put your primer down, and then obviously the 2 coats of the varnish would go over the top. But as I say, you don't ever sand a primer, because if you do, the floor goes patchy, because that affects it's a visual thing. So you always apply the primer. It might feel rough to the hand, doesn't matter. You then apply 1 coat of the varnish, you do your intermediate sanding, and then you move on from there. But while I'm on that subject, I think what I'm going to do is I just want to touch also. So that's a 1-component water-based product, and that's a what we call a half matte. So you can see it's got a little bit of shine. What we sell an enormous amount of, it's not the cheapest, is what we've got a product called 2K Invisible Protect. So this is a 2-component water-based coating that has the appearance of an oiled floor, but it actually is a commercial coating. So it's expensive. I mean, it's about 2,800 for a 5 kg, and you're talking 22 squares from it. So you're well over 100 Rand a square just for the coating. But I tell you what, we sell a lot of the Invisible Protect because it just has the durability but the look of an oiled floor. So I'll pass those around as well. Just interesting to see. So moving on, I'm going to move on to outdoor. Outdoor is always interesting. So this came from the Radisson Blue. So that is an old grey deck. That's it with the grey off, and that is it with a water-based coating on. So Loba are quite clever. They have products, which we have here, Loba Deck Degrayer. So this is a water-based product which is designed to remove the grey from the deck without sanding the deck down. Because sanding a deck is a problem, because a lot of the times you've got screws on top and you put a big belt sander over the top and you damage the screws irreparably. So this product, what you do is you would wet the surface of the deck. You then apply the deck degrayer to it. You leave it for 15 minutes, and then you use a single disc machine with a green scrubbing pad, like you would, a typical cleaning pad, and you literally you take the grey completely off. This would be in a situation where it is literally oxidized grey, normally where somebody's been oiling a deck. Or if a lot of the time they just leave the deck, they've done nothing to it. With a varnish, unfortunately, you normally will have to sand that you'd have to sand down. Any timber will oxidize grey, whether it be teak, whether it's jarrah. If you leave any hardwood timber, even pine, eventually it oxidizes to a grey. I mean, all it is really like a suntan on the wood. That's it. But obviously, even if you leave the timber deck to go grey, our belief is that you should at least be oiling it once a year. Even if they want to keep it grey, at least feed the wood with something to give it some durability, because typically with a belau deck, you get what we call surface checking, where you get these fine gaps and you get splintering and all that sort of thing. That's often because the guys do nothing to the belau. So yes, the belau is hard, but for, let's just feed it a little bit and give it a little bit of love, even if it's once a year. So in that aspect, we have a very nice deck oil that we sell as well, the Loba deck oil. But with oiling, you need to be aware, if you want to keep the color of the deck, let's say you do a belau deck, and you want to keep that brown, natural brown, you're probably going to oil at least twice a year. However, if you get an oil with color in it, be it gray, be it like a light brown, a dark brown, the color in an oil gives you much more UV protection. And the same applies to a varnish. I would never advocate a clear varnish on a deck. I remember back in the day when I first started Zimbo's, we were importing Zim teak furniture. And, people are fussy with furniture. I mean, a floor and a deck, I promise you, is a lot easier. But if a piece of furniture, the guys moan about the knot, about this, about that. And we used to start it off, we had the clear coating. The trouble is the wood, after a while, it almost goes white under the clear coating. The moment you use a coating with some form of color in, you just don't have that problem anymore. So, for instance, we have this deck finish, this is a water-based, this is a varnish. So a lot of the times, the natural oil, the deck oil that we sell a lot of the Loba deck oil for outdoor, but you have to keep doing it. So we do get customers that come in and say, listen, have you got a product where I don't want to touch the deck for 2 years or whatever it is? Well, that's where you want a deck finished. However, as you can see, we can always pass it around, or you can have a look afterwards. It's not shiny, but certainly it doesn't look as natural as an oil would. You know what I mean? But it does the business. If you want something where you're not going to have to keep maintaining, a water-based varnish with a bit of color in, is going to give you the durability. Because I'll be honest with you, the outdoor thing is really problematic for people, and they don't often understand. I mean, particularly with the deck oil, it's a natural product. It's soil-based. You're never going to oil once a year and keep the color. It's going to start going gray. And, we'll get the clients phoning in and they're like, I applied the deck oil 7 months ago and the deck's going gray. Yeah, it will, but at least we now, with a deck degray, at least you've got over there, you've got a solution to the problem, which is quite easy. So certainly your decking and maintenance, it is an issue. And I would just say, regardless of what they want to do with it, if they're oiling or if they're leaving it unfinished, feed the wood at least once a year. That'll help. Right, on to probably one of the most important things, care maintenance. So, what is probably the most important thing with care maintenance and cleaners for a hardwood floor? pH neutral. Every product almost that you buy from the hardware shop that is a cleaner is not pH neutral. It's either alkaline or it's acidic. I remember a naturally oiled floor we did for a client in Aranyazit, so we supplied the building contractor with a double black naturally oiled floor, magnificent. Installed the floor, the builder shot off to the nearest hardware shop and bought the cleaner, came back, cleaned the whole floor, and it went white. Why? Because it was highly alkaline. So that's why it is really important that the care maintenance should be followed and it should be specified by the supplier. And on top of that, they should do a proper handover. You know what I mean? You install the floor, the guys just spent 200K on the floor. The supplier needs to come and educate and tell the guy what's going on. And what we do is we include a spray mop set. So this is just a basic cleaning tool, and just so you know, all of the Loba care maintenance products, we've got all of that online on loba.co.za, and we've got it all available on Take-A-Lot. We sell a lot of Take-A-Lot as well. So aside from the fact of the pH neutral bit, which is obviously going to not damage the coating, the next most important thing is not to put too much water on the wood. So our worst enemy is the dear old spaghetti mop with a maid. That is 100% the worst thing, because they go spaghetti mop, water. They take the dirt back into the water, take the water and dirt back onto the floor, and after you've done that 40 times, the floor is not looking good. Okay, so this tool is inexpensive, really. I mean, I wouldn't term it as a high-quality spray mop set. It's something that'll last well, but we'll probably need to replace it after 2 years or something. But the thing is, we've tried selling a high-quality spray mop set for $2,000, and everybody looks at you like you're on some form of drug. So you'd rather just stick with the basic Loba one. So essentially what we do with a spray mop set, you fill the container up to the mark there with water, and then you get supplied with a refill. The refill has got an indicator on the back, so you put one of those into the water, and I'm not going to put the soap in, but essentially that goes like that, and there you can now see it sprays. But the best thing about a spray mop set is it limits the amount of water to the surface. That's exactly why we do it. And then you don't do that. What you're wanting to do is if you spray, for instance, like that, the idea is that you keep the one side of the blade moves forward, because you'll see when I turn it over, the dirt then goes generally to the back. So then what they do is they take this off. You have a 5-liter bucket of water with maybe a little bit of soap in, and you rinse it out, and you put it back on, and then off you go. So that really is the correct way. I mean, it's enormously simple, but it's just often not, most people want to do that. And all you do is you're rubbing the dirt one way and backwards there and back, and you're just messing the floor up. So really what you should do is, this is what we term basic cleaning. So if you talk about a wooden floor, you do basic cleaning with this. You use a vacuum, which doesn't have a nice doesn't have a hard plastic bottom. It's got a decent amount of those little bristles, so it doesn't mess the floor up. So really, the majority of the maintenance is vacuuming, and then the cleaning with a pH neutral cleaner. But then it starts getting a little bit more complicated when you have either a naturally oiled floor, or sometimes even with a varnished floor where you've got more traffic, or quite a lot of traffic. So what the Germans talk about is they talk about a sacrificial layer. So what they do, I'm going to talk firstly with the water-based coating, is we have a floor care mat and we have a floor care. So this product, you literally just squirt it on the surface, and anybody can do it. You get a microfiber mop, and you literally just put a terribly thin layer of this product on top of the varnished floor and leave it to dry, which is like an hour or so. But what it really is, it's like a minuscule layer, almost like a mini layer of varnish, but it will come off. So that you can do probably once a year even. So this is the majority, your basic cleaning, and then you come with a care product, and you do it. The nice thing about it, you don't have to do the whole floor. You can do just the high traffic areas, staircase, kitchen area. So then let's talk about a naturally oiled floor. You've specified a monocoat floor, or a Loba oil, or a Waka natural oil. Then what do you do? Because now this is much more tricky with a natural oil floor. You need to know what you're doing. Same applies. You'll still use your spray mop set with a pH neutral cleaner, but a naturally oiled floor needs a bit more love. It needs a high quality product that won't become sticky or attract dust and dirt. So we have a product called wax cleaner, which actually I'll put a tiny bit in a cup, and if you want to, you can smell it, but you can also feel it because it's very waxy. And you can actually, I've got guys that even use it on top of a UV coated floor, but you'll smell it. It smells very nice, but if you rub it between your fingers, you'll feel the wax in it. So what we would advocate on a naturally oiled floor, you'll mix the wax cleaner into a 5-liter water. So you'd put probably 10 mils, 15 mils in, and then you just clean the floor with the wax cleaner. Let it dry, and that wax cleaner, I've got guys that will use that all the time. Eventually the floor actually starts to shine, which obviously not everybody wants that, but it is because you've got such a high amount of wax in it. Then in proper care maintenance, you have a maintenance oil. So with a naturally oiled floor, it gradually becomes drier, and in front of the windows, particularly where you get a lot of sun, you're going to need to put in you're going to need to put this maintenance oil, and this is hell of a thin. So a maintenance oil has always got a percentage of solvent which blows off quickly, so the product dries fast. Otherwise, the kids would be covered in oil, and when they're running around, it would be a problem. You need to be able to apply it and have it dry within an hour or two. So the natural oiled floor does require more care maintenance. However, a naturally oiled floor, I remember having a building contractor phone me, and we did a client's floor in Bishop's Court with a naturally oiled floor, beautiful floor, and he bought a UV coated floor from a competitor, and 2 years later he wanted to know, why is the Bishop's Court floor looking like $1 million and his looks shocking? Well, he's got lots of young kids thundering around on those plastic bikes and things, so that scratched the hell out of the UV coating. But more importantly, the guy in Bishop's Court was fastidious with his oil and his wax cleaner and all that sort of thing. So the floor doesn't scratch, the coating doesn't scratch because it's all in the wood. So that's the beauty of a naturally oiled floor.